What is up, everybody? Andre here with another Saab video, and in this video I want to talk about some of the differences we are going to find in the transmissions from model years 99 to 02 on those 9.3s, and we'll even include some of the late gen 98 900s and some of the early gen 03 9.3s. So without further ado, let's start with the F25 style diff FM55 here, which you'll find in the bases and SE models, especially in the 99 years and also in those 98 900s. So one of the key differences between the two transmissions, even though they're both FM55 style transmissions, is the rear engine mount bracket. This is a huge difference in the early model versus the later style models and what the Vigan version used. So if you're doing any swaps, be considerate of these parts. You're going to need this rear engine mount, or you should hopefully have it already, 4726782, 3 bolts, and there's an alignment pin on the back right there. Sits only one way on the back, just as so. The nice thing is that the subframe, regardless if you have a convertible, 2-door, 4-door, they're all the same. So none of that stuff changes. You can see it's the same exact location, just the way it sits on the transmission is different. That also means, though, that there's another very important piece that's different, because while the earlier style sits on the back and is on its own, meaning it's just a mount, the one on the Vigan and later style transmissions is going to be both the rear engine mount and have a shift linkage support, which is this spherical ball right here. In case you need to replace that, that's an M8 by 1.25. And they're all the same size. Once you have that pitch, they're all the same, so they're all kind of universal. And that also means that you can change these if you need to change them, if they're corroded or pretty beat up. The other links on the shift linkage are all the same size. So again, M8 by 1.25. Again, so now, like I was saying, this is also a rear engine mount bracket as well as a shift link support, where on the earlier style, you're going to find that the shift link support is actually a part of the intermediate shaft seal retainer. And that part number, in case you need it, should be right here, 4626677. This is all one piece, meaning you can't replace this. This is all cast into one. So just be cognizant of that. And that, like I said, it's a part of the seal retainer assembly here, versus the Vigan style and later one, which is just a press in. And that's actually another one of the differences that segues nicely. So speaking of seal retainers, this is the same style that you find on the early gen. It's indented. It goes in, well, not indented, but it's an inward style, meaning the seal goes into here. It doesn't press, it doesn't protrude out like the Vigan style does. So actually this bumps out and has the seal built in, where this one is in. So just so you have them side by side and you know what you're getting into if you're doing any of these swaps. I know a lot of this stuff is pretty well documented. If you dig through the forums and the archives, you'll find other people that have done this swap several times, but I figured I would just share some of the parts here with you guys in case you wanted to see them all laid out and you wanted to see what was involved in doing a swap like this, and also just a bit of a historical archive and some of the things that I've noticed that are differences throughout the model years. The nice thing is that where everything grounds up to the reverse light here, everything on that aspect is the same, where the transmission side mount bolts up to the 1, 2, 3 is the same as here, 1, 2, and 3. So those are all the same. I know the shape is a little bit different. You can see this one's, the bell housing is a full circle with no extra castings, whereas this one is a little bit chunkier at the end. You can see it's got a little bit of edging. One of the things that means will be different is the actual protective plate that covers the bottom part of this. Here it's a circle, whereas on that one you'll have a little bit more of an angle to it. I don't have one in front of me right now to show you, but it's got a little bit more of a cut to it. But the mounting points are the same. So you can put this on that, or vice versa. It'll just have some extra or lack of material at the bottom. Moving on into some of the other differences that you're going to find, especially going from Vigan, non-Vigan, are going to be the intermediate shafts. Here is the style that was on this transmission. So it is all one piece. It is all one long shaft that goes into the carrier bracket here, which is already on this, which is a Vigan style intermediate shaft. It, I believe, has less teeth, but it's much thicker than the F25 style spline, which has more teeth but is thinner. And again, you can't really see it. It's a bad angle to see, but you can see it here. More teeth, smaller diameter, less teeth, chunkier. And I'm pretty sure that's the case. So the nice thing though is that this carrier bracket for the intermediate shaft is the same. Whether it's a 9.5, whether it's a 9.3, this is universal throughout all those years. And whether it's an F25 versus an F35 diff, this doesn't change. The bearing inside doesn't change. If you ever need to replace it, that bearing is easily findable on eBay. Quick Google search. You can find that. They're pretty universal. And it's the same process to remove everything. It's a circlip here, circlip there, pull the shaft, and there's a circlip that holds this. It's the same on this. So just one of the things you're going to find that's different. And if you're thinking, hey, well, the 9.5 is the one that's been Frankenstein from, and I can use some 9.5 parts, well, hold your horses there, partner, because here's a 9.5 intermediate shaft, and while they look identical, they're actually different size lengths because the 9.5 has a wider wheelbase. So that's another thing you need to be cognizant of. You really need, if you're going to be messing around with a 9.3 and running some Vigan style internals and you want the beefier drivetrain, this is going to be the piece that you're going to want. Moving on to some other pieces that you're going to need in case you're doing a rebuild. One of the things that I've been finding very difficult to just encounter that's OEM and clean and not used is the OEM clutch pipe that attaches to the slave cylinder here. And the OEM one comes down, does a double loop, and then hooks that 90 into the cylinder there. But this style is from a Chevy Cobalt and is about 20 bucks or less. I've seen them for like $12 on, I think it's like AZ Performance, or I think ZZ Performance here in the US. They sell it for like $13. You can probably get it for under 20 shipped, or you can just find it on eBay. But this is a press and fitting into the bleeder here that sits on top. So that all sits the same. You have that same little pin that locks everything in place once it's in place. And it sits just like that, right on the top of the transmission. Unfortunately, that Saab one, the reason I bring that up is because that Saab one is very difficult to find, and it's also very expensive if you do find it. So save yourself a headache. There's no need to look around for the crazy double looping Saab one. You can get this one for $12 and enjoy. One other thing I will recommend is that when you are, unfortunately this piece is not available solo, doesn't have a part number, it's a part of an entire clutch pipe assembly that goes to the master cylinder. If you find a aftermarket copy, then what I'm really going to recommend, or even an OEM one, just to save yourself the headache, take the original pipe off of this and get yourself a threaded stainless one. Much easier to work with. You could take it on and off, on and off, on and off. I've done that for a long time on 2 of my other cars, and they've never given me an issue. Really easy to bleed and let fluid run through. Not to say that the OEM one doesn't let you do that, but it's just a more serviceable part, and it's readily available from a couple different suppliers. You can check Genuine Saab if you're interested. That's where at least I got mine. I'm sure there's other people that have them. Let's see, what else do we have? Well, if you are thinking about running the Vigan drivetrain, here's another thing you're going to need to modify, because if you don't already have the entire suspension assembly from the Vigan, what you're going to have to do is carve away some of the inside of this hub. There's some material that comes down, and oh, hi, Mr. B. You can actually see it here where I've cut. You can see all of a sudden it gets angular. Saab wouldn't make something as ugly as I have here. They would have made it, they would have casted it much cleaner. And when you're working with a Vigan that actually has this setup from factory, then it is really nice and clean. But in my case, this came out of my SE 4-door, and I kind of got jammed up with needing Vigan parts, so I ripped a bunch of stuff out of that car while it was being worked on to throw it into this car. And what I ended up having to do was burr down some of this material that sits on the inside of this ring. And let me show you here. There, you can see that center one here. This also needs to be burred down, needs to be brought down. That way the outer cup on the axle can sit flush. And one of the other things that's going to be different is because that's a larger cup and it has to sit in a slightly deeper location and push things out, one of the things you're going to need to adjust is that ABS bracket. So you will need different nuts because they are different bolts because they are different lengths. The Vigan one sits a little bit further back and it has a slightly different setup. So I know that all these are different, but I kind of played with it, just spacing it out with some washers. But if you can find them, you're going to need different bolts and a different plastic for the Vigan one specifically. So that's one of the other things you're going to need to adjust if you're thinking about swapping over and doing any, you know, different transmissions, running different ratios. I don't know, maybe you want to run the older one. I personally was trying to save this one, but ran into a lot of issues with the builder. And so I ended up having to Frankenstein some other 2001 convertible transmission that looked a lot like this into my 99 four-door. And I ended up taking the transmission, or not transmission, but the drivetrain and everything out of this car while it was sitting in the storage and throwing it into the rebuild. And this is kind of all the stuff that I accumulated in the process. Well, not everything here, but this was just some of the stuff that I had gone through while I was going through that rebuild saga, or what I like to call my personal hell. One of the other things I just wanted to talk about, and this is a little bit of a PSA at this point because I'm pretty much done showcasing all the archive or historical stuff in case you're building any OEM Saab stuff and you need parts. One of the other things I just wanted to include in this video was a bit of a shifter alignment service announcement, a bit of a PSA here. This is certainly not the first time I've dealt with a short shifter or aligning the shifter assembly in one of these in general. This is my second, or third, actually, I should say. This is my third short shifter install, and Genuine Saab makes some awesome products, the short shifter being one of them. I had never encountered an issue such as this before, and maybe it was a part of my own lack of foresight or stupidity, what have you. But essentially my issue is that I had this transmission in the Vigan, which is the original transmission to that car. I had modified this original shifter with the short shifter, and I have all new mounts on that car. So everything lined up beautifully when I did the OEM shift alignment procedure, which, in case you don't know, let's go over it. It's car in fourth gear on level ground, lock the tranny in fourth, go ahead and loosen the collar here on the back that is holding this part of the shift rod. You are then going to find the alignment hole here and line it up with this secondary hole when you're in fourth. And once you have lined everything up, you go ahead and tighten up that collar again, and everything is nice. Pull the pins. You should have full access to all gears, no problems. My issue is that I did the alignment procedure, which I've done countless times, and I was going from first through fifth, no problems. But when I came to reverse, I felt like I was hitting the side of the housing and I was getting jammed up. I wasn't able to go down into reverse. If I shifted the alignment over to the other side, I was very easily able to access third, fourth, fifth, and reverse, no problems. But upon trying to get first and second, same issue. I felt like I was jammed. I was hitting the side of the housing. So because it hadn't given me any problems before, and because I had just swapped my rebuilt transmission into that, I thought, hey, maybe because it didn't go to a Saab shop to get rebuilt, that maybe something internally was wrong and maybe it wasn't adjusted properly. And because I was able to catch it with just a hair of adjustment. So I said, you know what, before I go pulling a tranny, doing this, pulling any more parts, why don't I try to be a little creative here and try maybe changing the distance between these 2 points. Maybe if I make this distance a little bit longer, I'll have access to get more side-to-side movement with less side-to-side movement in the cabin. It'll equate to you know, it'll even itself out, because really, guys, it felt like it was just a hair. I was off by just a hair. I was getting blocked. So I ordered this, which is an adjustable connecting rod, again, fitting those M8 by 1.25 spherical supports. I put everything in, and unfortunately what ended up happening was the thicker metal on the edges here allowed for less access on the side-to-side swing here. So that waiting, that frustration of hours and hours of trying to line up the shifter and thinking that maybe if I just did something with this, it would be resolved, ended up making the problem a lot worse. So I opted to say, you know what? I'm going to take everything apart. I'm going to leave the tranny in the car, obviously, but let me take the entire shift linkage, everything apart, and start this all over again, because I didn't have any problems before. So I did all of that, put everything back together, and, well, what I found was that my issue was in the bushing I had just replaced that sits at the bottom of the shifter. And you can see I left this gap here. There is naturally supposed to be a bit of a gap in this shift rod. You do want a little bit of side-to-side play, because that equals forward and rear movement as well. You don't want this too tight, because if you do, it's going to feel like every gear is being squeezed. It feels like every movement is really tight. You don't want that. So I guess what had happened is in the limited time of driving that other car, it had just loosened up a little bit and was maybe just about a turn off, because once I had brought that in about a turn to a turn and a half, I did the alignment procedure and put everything back together, and like that, it was in. It was like butter. So, and I had noticed a couple of people on Saab Central and a couple of the other forums that had mentioned shift alignment issues, especially when going from car to car. So I don't know, maybe this is an area that's overlooked. So I just wanted to share some of my experience and some of the knowledge that I've gained over the years of playing with these, and also in hoarding parts, as you can see. But I hope that this was useful to you, and if you have any specific questions about some of the model differences and other things that you might need to make adjustments to in trying to retrofit some of these other transmissions, just let me know. Feel free to reach out. And besides that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful day. We've got a beautiful weekend ahead of us here. And yeah, I hope you guys get to enjoy it. Have a good one, guys. Thanks.